Okay, let's talk about the square root of -1. The square root of -1 is not 1 or -1. One may say it does not exist. There's actually differing ideas on that are more developed than when we came up with the name, the imaginary number. But that is what we call this number, and we use I to denote it. On both the SAT and the ACT and the PSAT, if you see I, they will absolutely tell you either I squared is -1, or they'll tell you the square root of -1 is I. If you happen to get like a word problem that had like the number of text messages Ian sent, and they say I represents the number of text messages Ian sent, that's not the imaginary number. I say that, although I can't actually think of a time when they used I and it wasn't the imaginary number, but it's possible. They will tell you, absolutely will tell you, that you're going to be dealing with I, or in other words, a complex number. So a complex number is some number that uses I, like 3I, or I plus 2. These are complex numbers, okay? When we're dealing with I, it can oftentimes be a little bit confusing when you take a power of I. So let's talk about the powers of I. Okay, so I to the first is, of course, going to be I, right? I squared, of course, we already know this, is -1. I cubed, and now let's think about that for a second. So it's going to be I times I times I, and I times I is -1, so -1 times I will be -I. Now, if that doesn't make a lot of sense, that's fine, because you may say, but I is neither negative or positive. Yes, so when you think about -I, think that, if that helps, okay? I to the fourth will be I times I times I times I, or in other words, -1 times -1. -1 squared is 1. Okay, let's keep going. I to the fifth is going to be I times I times I times I times I times I, right? I. Okay, that's just going to be I to the fourth times another I. So it's going to be 1 times I. So this is going to be I. I to the sixth will be 1 times I squared, which is -1. I to the seventh will be 1 times -I, or -I. And then I to the eighth will be 1 squared, which is 1. We have a pattern, okay? This pattern will go on forever. It's a pattern of 4 that repeats, okay? Now, you might get a pattern problem, and a lot of times they're a logic-based problem, and let's say they ask you for the 19th digit in something, right? Well, it's not that big of a deal, but let's say it's the 1,037th digit. Well, then you might have a little bit of an issue, okay? So I'm gonna quickly tell you how to deal with pattern problems, and we're gonna use I as an example. So let's say we're asked to find I to the 57th, all right? What I want you to do is I want you to take the nth term, the th term, it could be third, I suppose, but this term, the number in the pattern, and I want you to put it under the divide sign. Then I want you to divide by the number in the pattern. Is that how you say it? The number in the pattern. There's not 8 in this pattern. It repeats every 4. So we're going to divide this by 4, okay? Now, don't use your calculator because you want the remainder, okay? There it is. This will be remainder 1. This will be remainder 2. This will be remainder 3. And then, of course, no remainder will be 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, so on. That is how you deal with a pattern problem. Now, you can see pattern problems in a lot of things that aren't just I. Let's say we have this pattern problem right here. I need to think of another shape, like a Saturn. Okay. And this pattern repeats forever. And you're asked to find the millionth, the 1,000,003 in the pattern. What are you going to do? Well, you're going to take 1,000,003 and divide it by 5 and find the remainder. Now, you can do long division here, but I hope that you would recognize that this would have a remainder of 3. So that means the smiley face would be the 1,000,000th third in the pattern. Okay. All right, let's go back to I for a little bit. Sometimes the I problem, there's usually one. There's usually only one. Sometimes there's 2, but usually just one. The I problem sometimes can be quite easy. You're just going to combine like terms. You might get like 3I plus 2I minus negative 2I plus 8. And this probably wouldn't be I right here. It should probably be this. And what would be hard about this problem would probably not be I. It would probably be the subtracting of a negative. So, you know, the answer would be 5I minus 6, right? Is that right? 5I 2 minus 8. Yeah, okay. But you could see how someone could easily make the mistake of doing maybe I here as the first term and I plus 10, okay? And a lot of times when people miss this kind of problem, it's for this reason. They just didn't subtract correctly. And that happens a lot. A lot of times people miss, which is why I want you to go over all your missed questions. Not because the academic content is hard, but because they just made a mistake like that. And both tests will totally, they know the common mistakes you make and they'll build them into the answers. But, you know, it sometimes can get a little bit harder. Okay, we're going to multiply these binomials together. We're going to FOIL. If you don't know what foiling is, you're going to go check out the quadratic section. So then we're going to do, I'm going to show you a trick I do just to make sure I don't mix up my negatives. So mixing up your negatives, as you can see, you know, flipping a sign is very, very common mistake. It's a very common error, even when people know the academic content. And what do we want? We want you to get everything right that you know the academic content on, right? Okay, so what I like to do when I'm multiplying something with I with something else with I is I do this. 3 times 2 times I times I. So, okay, so this is going to be 6 times negative 1. Great, negative 6. That just helps me, okay, to keep it straight. So we're going to FOIL this out. Let's go ahead and erase this now that we know it's negative 6. So negative 6, so first outside plus 24I plus inside plus 4I plus last plus 16. So this is going to be 10 plus 28I. A little bit harder, okay? I've seen a question like this on the test, and in my mind this is calculus, but it showed up on the test. So I can see, the thing is you don't need to know calculus to solve it, but I just feel like you don't even talk about the complex plane till you're in calculus, but I'm just going to tell you real quick what the complex plane is. It's not that hard. Don't worry about it. You're going to have an XY coordinate plane, okay? And then you have 1, just like 2, normal, right? -1, -2, -3. But this won't be 1, 2, 3. This is going to be I, 2I, and 3I. Okay? And this will be -I. This will be -2I. And this will be -3I. Okay? Let's say you get a problem like what point is halfway between this complex number and this complex number. Well, when you're dealing with complex numbers on the complex plane, this is just like 3, -2. Okay, so this 3 minus 2i is right here. Okay, and this will be -2 minus I. Okay, so then you would just, you know, do the distance, not the distance formula, midpoint formula. So you're going to take the average of 3 and -2, which would be 1/2. And then you're going to take the average of -2i and -I, which would be 3/2i. So this wouldn't be, it would be minus 3/2i. So that would be 1/2. Yeah, that looks about right, doesn't it? Yep. Okay. It's not that big of a deal. I just don't want you to be shocked if you happen to see the complex plane. I've seen it show up in a couple of tests over the last few years. It's not that hard. If you don't know how to find the midpoint, we're going to talk about that in linear algebra. But it's just the average of the 2 points. So make sure you can do that. A lot like the absolute value and the inequalities and the number lines. A lot of times the I problem is just kind of you just kind of have to think about it. Like it's a logic problem you have to work out. Okay? Work it. Like it's one of those I don't want you guessing. Okay? Because if you're rusty with it, you'll only get better by trying. Even if you fail, you're going to learn a lesson. So when you come across an I problem, don't be like, oh, I don't know. Do it. Do it. Even if it's hard, do it. You'll learn a lesson. Okay? All right. Great.